I picked today's topic for a very important reason. After being in change management for so many years and helping companies go as far as they could go to get better in improvement and culture change, I critically looked at why, if there was a reason why we never were quite able to get there. And the reasons always boiled down to the same one or two things, regardless of the product, the service, the size of the company, the level of the management team I was working with. None of that seemed to make any difference. And the topic that I've picked for today covers one really important reason why we were never able to get there. Have you ever thought about how close you are to achieving your improvement goals? How close you really are? Maybe a moment away, a word away, a phrase said in a staff meeting that makes the difference between total commitment and people backing away. Maybe it's a message sent by management that's unintentional, but it changes everything as far as what you could have gotten from that initiative or what we're trying to do better. So the second question is, do we really understand the barriers that are holding us back? And today we've picked a barrier that is real for everyone, regardless of what level in a company or what responsibility you have, whether it be in a production function, if it's manufacturing, even maintenance, support groups, executive teams, it doesn't really matter. This issue applies to everyone. In the next 45 minutes, you're going to learn some things about mixed messages you may never have heard before. And my hope is it's going to reveal to you some solutions for some challenges you may be meeting personally or professionally in your work group. And so a big reason why we never get what we want are mixed messages. If we look at the picture on the left, how many of you would go ahead and turn in where it says entrance only? Would anybody turn in? How many would not turn in because it says do not enter? Which one is the right answer? We don't know for sure. We just know that we've been told two different things, and apparently either one, since it's been posted on a sign, is acceptable. On the right, we have a sign that says keep right and one that says turn left. How many people would go right? How many would turn left? Is anybody wrong? Do we know what the right answer is? But how many times in a company do we receive these kinds of messages? And the instant they're received, we either have conflict or confusion that results from that message with no apparent right answer. And we've got people out here expecting to do their job every day that are really just trying to figure out what they really should be doing. Mixed messages. These are my definitions. Words that don't match actions. Promises that are made but not kept. And expectations that are set up for us but are never met. And when we have these messages occurring, the messages affect our beliefs in what we can change, in what people are capable of, in what our processes are capable of. It erodes the trust we have in each other. Because as soon as we're told one thing and another happens, what are we left to believe? And that mixed message sets a precedent for future communications. If we apparently couldn't believe what we were told this time, the next time we receive a message, can in fact we believe it? Commitment to change has an extreme impact by mixed messages. If we've got mixed messages coming from a management team who's on one hand said, this is the most important thing we have to do, but behave like it isn't, why should we give 110% when it's obvious that they're not fully committed? We could spend a whole hour just on that one. No foundation for lasting change. A mixed message causes a lack of trust to occur in an organization. And one reason I believe that we have ultimately difficult time sustaining change is because we don't have a foundation of trust to build change on. Sustainable change requires the same kind of actions over and over again over a period of time. That's what sustaining is. And if over that period of time there is no trust that actually acts as a foundation for those new actions, it's very easy to step away from those new actions and stop doing them. And as soon as we stop, the benefit that we were getting stops also. It may not happen right away. It may be months ahead. It might take a couple of years to catch up with us. And pretty soon, our investment in a new initiative is just not delivering the benefit that it may be used to. Or maybe we keep waiting and promising the executive team, well, you know, we just need a few more months here. It's going to come. You know, our people are taking a while to change, when in fact our people may not be the problem. It may be messages coming from management or a lack of the proper behavior and even paradigm about what their role is that causes an erosion here. I want to spend some time on lost management credibility. When I pick a keyword to talk about, I like to go to Webster's dictionary to look up the definition. Sometimes we get so used to throwing the word around that we kind of forget what it really might mean. And so, when I was working on this presentation, I looked up the definition of credibility, and interestingly enough, this is what it says. The power of inspiring belief and the capacity for belief. When we take that one thing into account and we think about the power that we have to inspire belief in others, belief in ourselves, belief in what we're doing, belief in what we can accomplish as a team, that's an amazing thing that we should protect every single day. If we lose it, look what happens. We can't trust or rely on the individuals around us, or maybe they can't trust and rely on us. We can't make decisions based on the feedback of those that we don't trust, because we're really not sure if they know what they're doing, if they understand the issue, or if they're going to be honest with us. Poor team player. Think about sports for a minute. What team wants an individual on their team that they cannot trust? I can't think of one. This is such a big issue, and yet in companies, it's something that we dance around, that we work around, that we hope somehow individuals that we can't trust will come around. And often management makes excuses for individuals who we can't trust. Sometimes they promote them to get rid of them. Sometimes they just move them to another area and they move the problems that they create with them. $1 million choices with no accountability. You may say, Kay, what do you mean by that? How can it be possible that we give people the authority to make $1 million choices and not be accountable for them? Well, think about this for a minute. When anyone is promoted to a management role, regardless of the level, they are crowned with the power to make subjective decisions. Yes, they make objective decisions, but they also can decide in a moment whether or not to go to a meeting to solve a problem, whether or not to talk to a department head they have a conflict with or a personality issue with. They can decide. And we accept their decision as, oh, that's just the way those people are. You know, we just can't seem to make any changes in that area. We just know that they're not going to follow through. We know that they're not, necessarily cooperating, and that's just the way it is here. What if we looked at the result of that decision because a problem wasn't solved, because issues weren't addressed in behalf of employees and departments to make their jobs easier, and we attached a value to that? It would far exceed, I'm guessing, what we suspect it would be. In addition to that, when people make these kinds of choices, they introduce strife into the workplace, or they keep it going, and it hurts their own credibility. I'm going to tell you a story about a man named Dave. Actually, his name wasn't Dave, But to protect his identity, I had to pick a name, so I picked Dave. Dave was a new employee who was hired to be a control room operator. And for those of you that aren't close to industry in your work, fixed plant equipment is often computerized and connected to computers and electrical devices to give monitoring and readouts as product goes through the production process. There's generally a control room that's attached to that fixed plant equipment, and there are people assigned to work in the control room that monitor screens. They can control flow rates. There's other things regarding inputs to the process that they can manipulate during the production cycle. They can also shut down and start up equipment. And to work this equipment and understand what they're doing, the training is usually fairly extensive. Dave, as a new person, was asked to spend time with John on certain shifts and Mike on other shifts that were senior operators that really understood the plant and how to run it. Interestingly enough, John and Mike had their own ways of running certain parts of the plant, which if you spend any time with these kind of people, that's actually pretty typical. People that have been in a control room for 20 years believe that they know the best way to run that equipment, and so that's what they operate from. Well, John began training Dave on his way to run the plant, and then Dave would spend a couple of weeks with Mike, and he discovered that Mike had a little different way to do some things in the plant. Well, after a few weeks of training, management said, okay, Dave, you've been through our training program. We think you're okay to go out and run the plant. And so they turned Dave loose, and he was in the plant by himself running it. And the first few weeks went just fine, until one day something happened. And there was an unexpected event, and Dave had to shut the equipment down. Well, Dave had been studying what he had learned from John and Mike, and he kind of been coming up with his own methodology that he thought would be better than John and Mike's methodology. And so he applied his own methodology, assuming that, of course, he had the authority to do so, since they did. And the result was an extended production loss and equipment damage. And management wrote Dave up for that. My question to you is, did management do the right thing? Was it Dave's fault that he took this action? How many of you believe that it was Dave's fault? I believe it was management's fault, because management had the opportunity to insist on a consistent practice. They knew how the operators were being trained. They knew that shift by shift that the plant was being run differently. And until something major happened, it was never a problem. And yet they wrote Dave up for something that through the training program, Dave had been trained that he had the ability to make that decision. Think about the mixed message that sent not only to Dave, but all the other operators. Now, what were they going to do? They knew they ran the plant differently. There was no standardized practice for them to default back to. Now there was confusion, conflict. You know, who's to say what comes next? And if management did nothing, now you've really got a bunch of confused people that don't know what to do. Now they're afraid to make a mistake because they think their career could be impacted as well. This second story is I call the sacred go-live date. I like to tell this story because there's millions of dollars of value attached to it, and all unanticipated. About 8 years ago, I was working at a billion-dollar property on site. This story doesn't have anything to do with my work, but this happened while I was on site. This operation was getting an enterprise-wide computer system that they paid about $15 million for. The implementation timeline for this system was very long, over a year. And as the deadline, which was July 1st, the go-live date, approached, you know, as implementations go, unexpected things always happen. You know, unexpected interfaces are discovered. We've got to take extra time to write those. There's always things that surprise us. We try to build timelines in for those surprises, but we don't always guess right. And pretty soon it was 60 days until July 1. And the project team knew that July 1 was in jeopardy. They probably weren't going to make it. 30 days out, they went to the management team. And they said, you know, we just can't do this. We're not going to be able to make it. Now, embedded in the timeline before July 1 was training for literally hundreds of people on site. The training was more extensive for some than others, depending on how they needed to use the system. Interestingly enough, corporate had sent resources for training and for project development that were already on site for that work. The project team asked the management team what they wanted them to do. The project team said, can we move the date? The management team said, no. We've already told corporate we would be ready. We're not willing to back off of that date. What can you take out of the schedule so that we can still say that we went live on July 1? The project team says, well, I guess we could move some of this training after July 1. Maybe 30 to 60 days we'll get everybody caught up. You know, we'll train the accounting people at a minimum so we can close the books. We have to do that. And then we should be able to meet the July 1 date. And the management team says, okay, let's do that. Now, the employees had already signed up for their training. Some of those people were in training for a week, depending, again, on what they needed to know. They all received memos that said, we're going to have to move your training until after July 1 because of some, you know, conflicts in the project or whatever. This is the biggest surprise of all that nobody counted on. Right before July 1, corporate contacted this site and said, we are so happy that you're going to be able to meet your July 1 date. We're pulling all of our resources and we need to place them at other sites. And so our people, except for about 2, will leave for post-implementation issues, and we're pulling everybody out. And now there was nobody left to train hundreds of people. And how could management now raise their hand and say, don't do that, we need all those people? As a result, and I was on site during this entire timeline, I am positive that that company never got the return they had promised or expected on that system, ever. Just with the minimal number of people that needed training, I can guarantee you that just the absolute minimum was done with those individuals. There were people that could do their job with their eyes closed before the conversion date and could barely get their tasks done at all afterwards. Millions of dollars of return sacrificed. But understand this. How much credibility did the management team lose with its workforce after they made this decision? The workforce couldn't believe anything they said. How could the management team say, people are our most important asset? They used to say that there all the time, when in fact all they had to do was maybe move the date 30 days ahead to capture much of the training and capture much of the value. And because they were willing to protect their own credibility more than they were willing to go to bat for their people, they lost all that value, and they sent their workforce a mixed message that over the years even is so difficult to undo. I want to spend some time on labels. This particular label is actually from a jacket that's hanging in my closet right now. Notice what's on the label. We know who made the jacket. We can see the size. We can see what materials it's made of, and by the color of the lining, we can see at least the lining is red. And so we make assumptions about the rest of the jacket based on what's on this label. What if the jacket in my closet was blue and it could talk and it said, I'm really blue. I'm blue. And we would say, no, you're red. We can see by your label that you're red, not blue. And now, that jacket, if we transition that jacket to a group of people who have been labeled, maybe their greatest goal now is to escape their label. A year ago, I finished one of the most amazing scopes of work in my career. I was asked to come into a plant to change the culture. This particular plant was labeled by its own management team as the worst place to work on site and had been labeled that way for 2 decades. This plant was a critical piece in the production process. It wasn't like they were off to the side here doing something not important. The product flowed directly through there to the end. And because of the perception of that plant being a constant non-performer, they never meet their targets. I mean, we can go on and on. The people hate it down there. They're terrible. The management team's terrible there. HR backed away from those issues and just didn't give them much attention. They were left out of meetings that they should have been included in regarding production. And I walked into that and I was truly amazed. And I'm thinking, you know, this label is causing this barrier, this silo, this rejection, this separation from the rest of the team. In fact, the superintendents that asked me to come in and help them told me one day, hey, one of our greatest objectives is to escape our label. And after just a few months, we were able to do some amazing work. But the power of this is so subtle, and we're so used to labeling individuals. Sometimes even before we meet them, somebody might tell you, now, you haven't met that person yet, but when you go to their office, they're going to tell you that they will follow through, and you wait and see they won't do it. And before you ever meet that individual, you probably go in now with a different mindset. You've already made up your mind about that person based on what you were told. And maybe that is that person's behavior, but that label will change how you communicate with that individual. And it will also change possibly how much you involve that individual because an assumption you have now made. This is extremely powerful stuff. Other unspoken messages, you know, we focus a lot in our work often on spoken messages. Words not matching actions. Those are easier for us to detect because we heard them and then we were watching for what happened and what we thought would happen didn't happen, but the unspoken ones can be some of the worst out there. Again, management saying this program is our top priority, and when they've got an opportunity to come and hear about the program, maybe they even ask for a special presentation, and at the last minute, after all these people that have put 110% into their work on this program are ready to proudly talk about their achievements, that executive says, you know, I'm just changing the agenda today. I think I'd rather just talk about something else. I have seen this happen at least twice in my career. The result is devastating. When you got people that are spending the kind of overtime that I have witnessed, fully dedicated to making something better and meeting that expectation or exceeding it, and then you get a communication that all he did was change the agenda. In his mind, all he did was change the agenda. But that isn't all he did. Because the moment he did that, now people are asking questions. Hey, I've been giving so much extra time to this. If he doesn't even care, after he said he was interested to come and hear what we had to say and what we've done for the company, why should I keep giving all this time? Why? And people begin backing away. And then we wonder 6 months and a year from now, well, gee, what happened? What happened? And it can be something as simple as that. Sacred cows, where a department or an individual is carved out from a scope of work. Everybody else has to participate except this department. We'll just make them exempt for whatever reason. And then there's always an impact when that happens. Because as we know, if you think about an org chart for a minute, if we were to draw process flows through org charts, there's almost no process that is fully isolated within a single department. As soon as we bump up against a sacred cow department, what happens to that project? It dies. Because now that department must take action and must change something for us to get the benefit, and they have already been told they don't have to participate. And we lose that opportunity. This last story is about a personal friend of mine who wears a uniform to work every day. On the uniform are keywords from their mission statement. And the workforce is held to a very high standard regarding those keywords. And the management team has disconnected itself from the meaning of that mission statement to a level that I have never seen in my career. The double standard is beyond what I could even describe to you. If I told you stories, you would not believe them. He told me one day they have a suggestion box at work. And he took a piece of paper and he wrote on it, "On our shirts, but not in your hearts." And he put it in the suggestion box. And he signed his name. To me, that was so impactful. I've actually written articles that included something about this. What an impactful message. So, we've talked a lot about this. It's been kind of a depressing conversation. But let's talk about some solutions, because there are some, most of which don't cost anything except some courage and commitment. The first one we're going to talk more about is raising awareness, which we're doing today, about the impact of mixed messages and how it changes our ability to think about those, linking value to those, and also linking back to management execution. And the third one, expanding management's comfort zone so they can begin addressing these issues. We've talked again about a couple of these. The losses in thousands of millions of dollars are impacted trust, culture, and morale. Project success we haven't really talked about, but think about how a project is impacted by mixed messages. If you've got people even within the project team that don't see things the same way, or are bringing different ideas that are in conflict, that's one issue. The other is getting a message from someone in management put towards that project team that sets them off in one direction, and then somebody else later coming down, another person in management saying, wait a minute, you guys need to do this over here instead. And now you've got a project team that's caught up in confusion, not sure what their mission really is, even though when they were formed, they were told what it was, and now they've received mixed messages on that, and projects never end well when people don't understand exactly and aren't clear about what they should be doing. Improvement initiatives, we've touched on that already as far as this terrible impact that mixed messages can have on the success of initiatives and sustainability. Improvement history we haven't talked about, but it's something I'd like for you to think about. It almost goes back to our conversation we just had, where if we've got employees that have been in an organization for some time, and they've had experience with multiple initiatives for change, regardless of whether they've been large or small. And time after time, if they've seen that we always come up short from what we expected to achieve, they begin believing it's not possible to be any better than they are right now. And so a negative improvement history develops, and pretty soon it affects their ability to even reach for something higher, because they've made up their mind. And often just helping people understand that they really can be different. If certain things change, is very empowering to them, and it gives them hope again instead of being hopeless. Management's credibility, we've already spoken quite a lot about today, and the risk associated with that. It's important to understand that awareness brings power, joy, and profit to us. It's really the first crack, the first opening of the door that gets us there. And understanding our barriers, mixed messages being one, is part of that.
What do you mean awareness? Awareness of what?
Everything we've spoken about today puts a new definition on the cost of mixed messages. And it helps people see how damaging those mixed messages are in the workplace. And if they see how damaging those are, and they are an individual who delivers mixed messages, even unintentionally, it will help them step back and self-evaluate their own words and actions and make better choices. But until they see it for themselves, it's difficult for them to make that change.